And so that's why I never wash the colored clothes with the whites, and with that knowledge, hopefully you can avoid having a blangonga lump on your head like me.
Oh, sorry, are you done? I didn't realize that this was what it was like listening to an elder drag on.
How rude!
Elder Dragon,
you didn't have to say it again.
Ladies, gentlemen, and monsters of all ages, Monster Hunter Wilds is an extremely unique game within the series, and one of the more major reasons that I think people often forget about is that there aren't actually any Elder Dragons in the game right now, even after 3 title updates. Well, at least if you go by literal monster type categories, because I think we can all agree that Shia is essentially an Elder Dragon if it wasn't for the fact that the construct category is a thing, and then there's also Omega Planetes, who is categorized as 3 question marks, which is the same thing that Gore Magala used to be categorized as before they added the new Demi Elder monster type to classify him in Wilds. So you could technically argue this means Omega could be an Elder Dragon, and if we compare that to the fact that the Behemoth, the previous Final Fantasy crossover collaboration monster, was categorized as an Elder Dragon, well, for the sake of this tier list, I'm going to be ranking both Shia and Omega against the rest. I will be counting them as Elder Dragons for the sake of this, and we'll also be including Behemoth too, just because it's my list and I want to. As well, there are over 50 monsters that will be ranked on this list today, and for some of them, more so the older generation ones, they do have subspecies that are very, very minor changes from the base creature. So if I ever put 2 monsters up on screen at the same time to rank together on the tier list, it's because I just don't consider them to be different enough from each other to actually have different preferences between them in my head. Final note, this is all just my personal opinions. You are free to disagree with me, and to be fully clear, it's not like I actively dislike a single monster on this list, even the F tier ones. This is just how I compare them against each other. That said, let's start at the bottom of the list and work our way up. In the F tier, we have 2 monsters, and they are Laoshan Lung and Ashen Laoshan Lung. If I was ranking everything, like considering the first time they were added and actually considering the way that things were at that time, stuff like that, these guys might be higher. But there's no logical way for me to compare these 2 Elder Dragons to modern Elder Dragons and not just find them extremely disappointing in comparison. They are slow, they're not particularly eventful, they don't have a whole lot of personality aside from just being big and being old, and that's it. Next up then, starting off the D tier, is Zora Magdaros. I think his fight is, for the most part, not much better than the Lungs as far as the actual combat. There are some interesting moments, but I think the most interesting part of the fight is when you start fighting Nergigante on his back, and Zora is basically just the setting for that. He's not the fight. He's the map that you fight on top of, and that is cool, and I think design-wise he's awesome, I think lore-wise he's cool, but the actual fight is just so not a real fight that it really brings him down for me. After that, we have all 3 of the Morans in one clump. Their size is impressive, the hunt is neat the first time fighting them from the back of a sand ship, but realistically I've always struggled to view Doran Moran as more than just Jen Moran with one pointy thing coming out of his face instead of 2, and that's not to say I consider Jen to be the most interesting creature either. Crucify me if you will, but I think that the monster itself is a lot less interesting than just the pure concept of sandship combat in general, and I think the reason that we have 3 of this type of creature that are so similar to each other is just so the devs could do sandship combat as an idea 3 times with different variations and changes for each one. And while combat from the sandship is cool the first time, it gets old pretty quickly too. Bumping it up to the C tier then, now let's start with Rusted Kashala Deora, who I believe I had in a lower tier when I last did this like 2 years ago, and he's just sort of grown on me a bit since then. The fight is still disappointing to me, mostly because I know he's supposed to be like a more physical, grounded version of Kashala, but it just doesn't feel like they lent far enough into that. I think the idea is great, I think visually is cool, I think the sounds are cool, but I just wish that they went more into it and were more intentional with it, like make it so he really just does not fly during combat and just is a grounded Kashala. Moving on then, let's talk about Crimson Fatalis, and this is one of the ones in an odd position because it's just been so long since the last time this monster got an actual like updated fight and moveset, and all of the old game Fatalis fights I find very underwhelming. And that also includes Old Fatalis, as he is now known, who I have right beside Crimson on the list. Visually neat, lore is cool, but the fight outside of the super attack specifically just doesn't really interest me in its current state, though I do hope that we see an updated modern game version of these guys sooner rather than later to change that. Then we've got Nakarkos, awesome monster design, and I think the way that they slow burn the reveal of him, first appearing as 2 tentacle heads separately before eventually being revealed as a full cuttlefish monster with those tentacles coming out of it, is awesome. But as much as this is a monster that should be up my alley, it's both edgy and cute at the same time, for whatever reason, it just never really felt quite right to me, almost like how sword fighting choreography in movies is people finding flashy ways to hit the other person's weapon instead of actually trying to hit the person. It feels like when you're fighting Lagiacrus, the actual monster is like fully underground most of the time, and you can only actually hit like his weapons, the things that he attacks with, not his actual vital locations. Next up then is Velkhana. I do like Velkhana in a lot of different aspects. Aesthetically, it's very cool, solid story impact and stuff like that. Even the fight itself I do like for the most part, but I've said this probably every time I've talked about this monster over the years, it just really bugs me that it has an ice breath that can pierce its own ice walls. If the ice walls are a solid structure that stops the player's attacks and movements, then it should be a solid enough structure to block an ice breath. But the ice breath goes through the wall, and that bothers me in an unreasonable amount. After that, let's talk about Dire Moralis, who has moved down a little bit for me over time. I think visually and lore-wise, he's cooler than the Fatalises are, even as far as I'm concerned, but his fight is just such an absolute drag. You're basically fighting his toes and his tail, and 90% of the attacks that he does to you are meteors that just rain down from the sky. It gives the feeling of fighting an unstoppable force, which is what it wants to do, but it just isn't that very engaging of a fight in the moment to me. Moving on, then let's pop on up to the B tier and start off with my ex-wife, Kulvtaroth. She was the first example of the modern siege fight system, the first time in the modern games that we had a monster that took multiple hunts and quests to technically defeat one time. And I thought that that was quite interesting. But her Master Rank version got rid of a lot of the fluff and stuff around that, and while that fluff was cool the first few times, it did get old pretty fast, so the Master Rank version being right to the part that I actually really liked the combat for was a notable improvement. The B tier doesn't contain any monsters that I dislike by any means, it's just things that I don't like as much as the monsters I place above them. Then we have Kushala Daora's standard version, his base version. If we were talking about World and Iceborne Kushala, this would be another story, but they did make him much more enjoyable in Rise and Sunbreak in my opinion. He became less of a nuisance for melee weapons and a much better paced fight in general. Next up is Teostra, who I have similar feelings about. I find his design less interesting than I find Kushala's, but I enjoy his fight more. I like his sort of swapping between blast and fire mode in his most recent iterations and how that was added, and it just made him feel a lot more dynamic through the hunt, but in the end I just find his design a little bit less interesting than a lot of the other elders. Then we have Dalamadur and Shia Dalamadur. I think these guys are visually super cool. Conceptually, honestly, some of my favorites on the entire list of Elder Dragons. The idea of a gigantic snake with sharp nodules coming off of it that let it burrow through straight up mountains is badass, but the actual fight in the game is just so lacking. It's very static, and it doesn't have that sort of cinematic climactic feeling that they have consistently nailed with spectacle fights from the 5th generation onwards. I think that they are awesome monsters in every aspect except for the actual fight itself. After that, let's talk about Kirin. Lightning Horse is neat, fun mythological feeling to it all around, very unique, being the only like horse-shaped species we've got for large monsters. Not all large monsters are long, but all long monsters are large. The lore power of Kirin is awesome. The idea that it could move so fast that we would perceive it as teleportation, but that stuff just doesn't happen in the actual fights in game, and instead the actual fight is something that I find quite irritating, to be completely frank. Then we have Xenojiva. Conceptually amazing as a spectacle fight the first time you go against it, it is unforgettable, and I remember that first hunt to this day as someone who has a terrible memory, but it's just got very low replay value. Every hunt after the first one, I just didn't enjoy that much at all, and the only version with a fight I really did like was Arch-Tempered Xenojiva, but obviously we're not comparing Arch-Tempered monsters here, just the base monster. Finishing off the B tier then, we have Wind Serpent Ibushi. Really cool guy, I like his concept, and the sort of shape and style of Elder Dragon is a really funky skeleton swap up when we first encountered it, but I think he's just less cool than Thunder Serpent Narwa is, and they are encountered so close to each other and tied so intrinsically to each other, so it just feels like it pushes Ibushi down to prop Narwa up. Up to the A tier, these are elders that I genuinely do really like personally. It's really just splitting hairs past this point for minor differences of preference for me. Orochi Kirin, I think, is just the better version of Kirin in every possible way. The ice shenanigans are much more interesting to me than lightning shenanigans, and I think a modern version of Orochi Kirin would blow people away. After that is Guys Magorm. My opinions on him have dropped a little bit with time passing. He's got a bit of that Xenojiva syndrome, I think, where visually the fight is wild as hell. It's very memorable, it sticks with you, but for this one, my misgivings are with the actual design of the creature. I just don't feel like it looks that much like a real living, breathing creature. And yes, I know he's basically subterranean, he sort of looks like a mole, and a lot of non-surface dwelling animals are weird like that, but he just isn't something that I vibe with personally. Moving on, Shagaru Magala, and technically we should talk about Gore Magala here too, if you would count him. He is now classified as a demi-elder, which is technically not the same thing as an elder dragon, but I think I find him relatively similar to Shagaru regardless. Gore's visuals and design I do prefer. Shagaru I prefer the fight for, and Shagaru is an awesome monster in pretty much every facet. The only reason that he's in this tier is my personal preferences. I think he could easily be an S+ tier for someone else, and I wouldn't bat an eye. Then we've got Sedeus and Goldbeard Sedeus. I absolutely adore these giant whale monsters visually. I love whales, and they're just big whales with fur and beards made of that fur, and these big old horns that are so big that they cause them pain. And I think that they are amazing in every aspect that isn't the actual combat against them. These guys are sort of like Dalamadur for me. Combat against them does not feel good, but their design is fantastic even so. After that, we have standard regular Valstrax, and I do love Valstrax. I was always someone who was a bit hesitant on him at the beginning because he felt almost like a man-made monster, and that was something I said before. We had literal man-made monsters in the series in the form of the Guardian monsters, but Valstrax didn't really feel like a natural part of an ecosystem to me. All that to say, his design is absolutely sick, his fight is really fun, and the main thing holding him in this tier instead of going up is just sort of nitpicky stuff. I think he's great. Then we've got Safijiva, who I also think is awesome. Visually a very cool monster. The fight itself is great. Honestly, I like pretty much everything about this monster to a very large amount, but except for one very minor issue that I have, which is when they first teased Safijiva, they did it as like a silhouette, and it made it look like his general coloring was these really deep, dark black scales, which would have been such a good contrast with the bright blue energy blast. And then when they actually put him in the game, he ended up being a red monster instead of a black monster, and I don't like that color combo as much. Yep, that's it. Super minor, but that's the reason. Next up is Thunder Serpent Narwa. Same reasons I like Debushi aesthetically speaking, except I like the coloring on her more generally. The way that she uses thunder as an element is really special. She basically has magnetism powers as an extension of thunder element, and that is an awesome way to make magnetism enter the main series games. Pretty much the fight is solid, the design is solid, it's a great monster overall, it's just not a personal favorite of mine. Then we've got Val Hazak. Awesome design is like an undead reborn dragon that sucks life out of other creatures in order to fuel itself, and taking that idea and making it actually sort of work enough for suspension of disbelief through the concept of miasma is great. The fight itself is a solid representation of these ideas, but it's just a little bit slower paced than I like from my Monster Hunter combat. Moving on, there's Runer Nergigante. I pretty much always felt like this about Runer. He feels like they made him just less natural feeling of a creature than the base one, which isn't necessarily bad as a concept, it's just not something that I think is better than regular Nergigante. I like him more, simple as that. Then the final monster on this tier is going to be Behemoth. As a creature that isn't originally a Monster Hunter design to begin with, it's a bit awkward to compare him aesthetically to other monsters. I don't think that he is bad by any means, but my personal preferences do lean more towards proper Monster Hunter creatures. That said, his fight is unforgettable. It is fantastic. As someone who spent a lot of time doing MMO raiding in the past, I found the actual fight he had to be really neat as a way of sort of blending MMO raiding with Monster Hunter's action combat, and it filled a very specific niche that no other monsters fight does, at least until recently. That said, let's move on to the S tier, and this is essentially the Elder Dragons that I think are at the top of the barrel. The only reasons they aren't in S+ is my own personal preferences between them. There's no negatives to really take away from it at this point, it's just the vibes match with me more for some than others. That said, starting S tier is regular Nergigante. Conceptually a near perfect monster, I love the idea of an Elder Dragon that doesn't have any like wacky, overpowered element effects or massive spectacles to show off how strong he is. He just is strong. He is a big, mean, nasty physical powerhouse that eats other Elder Dragons, and that's awesome. Then we have Blackveil Valhazak. My feelings are basically identical to regular Valhazak for the most part, with two exceptions. The fight is slightly more engaging, it's slightly faster paced, and the aesthetics and setting are just way better. Using mushrooms growing on him and their spores as a miasma replacement is such a cool concept for a variation of a monster, not to mention that the whole vibe of the map is different when he exists exists on the ancient forest too. After that, Allmother Narwa. It has the best bits of regular Narwa and then way more. Super high spectacle. I love her basically consuming Ibushi's energy during the fight itself. Her super attack is unforgettable, and the general feeling of the hunt is just so grand and epic in the truest meaning of those words. Moving on, let's talk about Gogmazios. And while my opinions on him were always relatively high, they improved a fair bit when actually experiencing the fight for myself. I think conceptually he's a really cool creature. The whole Dragonator in his back is such a cool concept, and the fact that you can break it off of him as a part break and then impale him with the Dragonator that was part of his body is so extra in the coolest of ways. He's one where the fight that he has is a bit outdated compared to modern oversized spectacle monsters, but it honestly still holds up more than well enough for me to consider him on par with everything else in this tier. Then we've got Chameleos, fantastic Elder Dragon, super quirky and unique design, beautiful aesthetics, and a very unusual fight in a way that makes it feel different than any other monster, while still feeling like it is a Monster Hunter fight. And I love monsters that offer a change of pace while still sticking to the general combat formula that the series is known for. Then we've got Fatalis. Visually he's neat but not crazy cool, but this is the only version of a Fatalis that has a modern version, which made him look better. But more importantly, his fight is now one of, I think, the best fights in the entire series if we're speaking objectively. Such precision required unique mechanics and forced focus targets like having to break the head to keep him from just one-shotting you later in the fight, and the scripted moments of the giant fire breaths as well. All of those things are just so cool, honestly. After that is Lunastra. This is one that I know a lot of people disagree with, but I think Lunastra's modern incarnation is just incredible. Something about being a blue lion dragon instead of being a red one makes me immediately like her more than Teostra for some reason. But then the fact that so many of her moves are like crescent or moon-shaped is a very cool extension of her design. I love all the bonus mechanics with the fire puddles that stay on the floor, and I think she's just one of the best conceptually designed fights in the modern games. Next up, Crimson Glow Valstrax. Honestly, relatively similar feelings to normal Valstrax, except that his moveset is just more interesting. That's the only real difference, and that's why he's a tier up. Then we've got Malzeno, great Elder Dragon, super thematic, awesome fight, and a great way to interpret the idea of a vampire in the form of a Monster Hunter monster. The only reason that he's not higher up is because he's not one of my personal favorites. After that is our first Risen monster of the list, which is Risen Shagaru Magala from Sunbreak. Feels better than regular Shagaru in pretty much every way. Aesthetically, I love the orange glow, and he's got a faster fight too, which is something that I enjoy. So just a clear tier up from base Shagaru, and I hope if they do ever bring Shagaru Magala back in the series again, which obviously they will at some point, I hope it does take some of the extra moves from Risen Shagaru. Similarly for Risen Teostra here, pretty much the same feelings I have about regular Teostra, except the coloring is way cooler to me than standard Teostra, and the Risen fight improvements, the extra bits of the moveset, make me like him more too. Enough that I think that he is a genuinely great monster and a great hunt in the series. Finally, for the S tier is where I put Omega Planetes. I know plenty of people will disagree with that, but I think this is one of the best combat experiences in the series. It's not necessarily the best Monster Hunter fight, but it is one of the best fights in a Monster Hunter game, by which I mean it is so totally, wildly different from any other Monster Hunter experience, but the precision, the uniqueness, and it's essentially an evolution of everything that I liked about Behemoth, but done in a way that fits even more into Monster Hunter's combat flow. It feels less janky, less out of place, and I think that the Omega is also much visually cooler than Behemoth 2 personally, and I love that he's basically like a robot frog as far as the way that he actually moves. Then we have the S plus tier, and this is either things that I personally just prefer in general, or things that are so undeniably, objectively high quality that even without being a personal favorite of mine, I think they deserve this level of spotlight. First up, Yamasukami. This has always been a tough one for me because I think Yamasukami is one of my all-time favorite monster designs and concepts. Like if we were talking purely concept, purely visuals, it would be in my top 3 monsters of all time, but the fight as it is in the main series games is just such a letdown. It still is carried by the design, but I think it could be my literally favorite monster if they breeded the fight and made it good. Then we've got Elatrion, which I think is one of the best fights in all of Iceborne, which in itself is one of my favorite games of all time. This one is pretty divisive with the whole Eschaton Judgment shenanigans and forcing you to use elements to counter him, but I don't mind that much, and if we count out that part, then his design is generally badass, and the actual fight and the moveset that he has in Iceborne is one of my favorite monster movesets to fight against, just full stop. The shape of his attacks, the variety of the attacks, the pace of the attacks, it just feels really satisfying to fight against, simple as that. Moving on, Amatsu is next up. Design is solid, beautiful monster, very very sort of imposing creature for something that's equally as pretty, but the reason for this placement is entirely the Sunbreak rework of the fight itself. This is one of those examples where they made a spectacle fight that still felt like fighting a real proper monster, so it doesn't change the core gameplay away from what Monster Hunter normally feels like, instead just adding in extra mechanics, extra things to deal with it. Next up, Namiel. This is just straight up one of my favorite monsters of all time, Elder Dragon part aside, so of course it is at the top of my tier list for Elder Dragon specifically. The design is incredible, straight up feeling like a deep underwater creature but represented as a land traversing dragon, like the exact embodiment of the Coral Highlands, having a real underwater vibe, while in actuality being very elevated and dry. They are a perfect pairing, and I will never get over the absolute beauty of the fight itself. Then we've got Shara Ishvalda, another all-time favorite monster of mine. The first time experience fighting him is probably the most unforgettable thing in the series to me. First fighting against this weird rock golem thing until it cracks open and the rocks shed off and reveals this giant crazy demonic dragon. The uniqueness of using sound waves and vibrations instead of a proper element, and it achieves similar results as an element. The ability to turn patches of the ground into quicksand through these vibrations is just so cool, and that doesn't even mention the thing that people always bring up about how his eyes look past the player and it looks like he's looking into the camera, and it's really creepy and it's just really cool. Then we have Primordial Malzeno. This is, I think, the shining singular achievement of Sunbreak, the thing at the top of anything that Sunbreak did. There were so many unforgettable monsters and fights through Rise and Sunbreak, but Primordial Malzeno is design-wise incredible. The story around him is incredible. The mid-fight form changing from high-class, respectable, beautiful lord to super aggressive and angry, massively powerful creature due to the curios and the way that his inner struggles are palpable in the combat. It's just awesome all around. Moving on, a trio of Risen Elder Dragons, in my opinion, are pretty similar for all of them really. Risen Kshala Daora is honestly one of the biggest glow-ups of the whole series from a base monster to something greater. Base Kshala in Rise is the best version of base Kshala that had existed, and Risen Kshala is totally completely different from him in all positive ways. It's the best version of Kshala by far. Risen Chameleos is just a solid improvement over the base monster, not as large of a gap as from Kshala to Risen Kshala, but I also think that base Chameleos is a lot cooler than base Kshala is, so Risen gets into my S+. Then Risen Crimson Glow Valstrax, you can easily see the progression here. Valstrax is in the A tier for me, Crimson Glow is just straight up improvements of regular Valstrax and went into my S tier, and Risen Crimson Glow is just another straight up improvement and goes into S+ for me. Finally then, you can probably guess what the last monster is going to be here. We've got Shia finishing off the S+ tier. Shia is such a fantastic fight. One of the greatest improvements in the last few years of Monster Hunter is just the sheer hunt quality of oversized monsters. They've gone from feeling like on-rails experiences that you do just for the sake of the vibes and maybe the rewards and stuff like that, to being actual meaningful, proper monster hunts with regular Monster Hunter pace, with mechanics and unique attacks, and Shia is a fantastic example of that. The fight in high rank, at least when it first came out in Title Update 1, was also very challenging, but in completely reasonable ways, and maybe a bit of recency bias is applying to this one, but I think even as a creature that isn't quite something I would thematically be a massive fan of myself, I think objectively speaking, Shia is just one of the best designed Monster Hunter experiences in the series, especially after the context of the story journey through Wilds leading up to it. That just about does it for today then, everyone. My updated tier list of all Elder Dragons in the Monster Hunter mainline games, as well as a couple that are questionable if they really count, but it's my list, so it's my choice. I hope you've all enjoyed this, and let me know your thoughts on my rankings down in the comments below. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.